US combat planes are like immortals in sci-fi movies. They have many super fictional powers, like spitting fire and the ability to land in water. Any fixed-wing or rotary-wing aircraft that is flown by a legitimate or insurrectional armed service of any kind is considered a military aircraft. Military aircraft can be combat or non-combat in nature. Combat aircraft are built to use their own weapons to destroy enemy property or persons. Usually only the armed forces design and buy combat aircraft. Non-combat aircraft can carry weapons for self-defense, even when combat isn't their primary purpose. These are typically used in support roles and can be created by either military forces or non-governmental organizations. Greetings from Daily Aviation. In this video, we're going to analyze the most underrated US combat plane ever. There are a lot of fantastic planes from World War II's Pacific Theater, but the Hellcat stood out because it shot down more Japanese aircraft than any other fighter. The Corsair had the performance to compete with land-based fighters, which was an impressive feat at the time. It had an incredible kill ratio and has been immortalized in films and television. On the other end of the scale, we have a lot of planes that did their part, but were not as well known. Although the Kingfisher made a significant contribution, its crews were brave, and we think it's a really cool airplane. We can understand why its exploits are not frequently discussed. The airplane that we want to talk about today, the Falcon, did a lot of rescue work, which makes it important. It's the plane that rescued Eddie Rickenbacker and the crew he was with, but its combat role was rather limited. A number of firsts for a United States airplane flown by the United States military during World War II included being the first plane to attack the Japanese, flying in the first offensive raid against the Japanese well before the infamous Doolittle raid, and being present at almost every major naval engagement the United States took part of during the war, including the Coral Sea, the Aleutian Island Campaign, Guadalcanal, and others. As tactics changed, this plane transformed from a hopeless target for the enemy to shoot down to a highly successful anti-shipping weapon. At one point during the war, the Japanese began to think that the new US Superjet was hitting their ships. I want to talk about the flight engineer position on this plane because it's not well understood, either on the plane or generally. We'll also cover some of the CAT's combat history during the Second World War. What was this super weapon, the Consolidated PBY Catalina, or CAT for short? This video won't be overly technical. First, we'll go over some brief seaplane history, then get into the Catalina's specifics. We'll also cover some of the Catalina crew's combat history during the war. The name PBY was a result of the United States Navy's designation system at the time. It stands for Patrol Bomber. The designation of Consolidated Builder is the reason most United States Navy Catalinas were P-5s. If it weren't for that, most of the US Navy Catalinas were P-47s. This is a PDY-5A. There are also PDY-6s and PDY-6As, which are essentially the same aircraft but with late war upgrades, improved tails, and other things of that nature. The name Catalina originated from the British and was adopted by the US Navy in 1942. There were many other names for this aircraft, but in this video, I'm going to keep it simple by calling it the PBYS Catalinas, or CAT for short. Seaplane, the Catalina is not just a float plane or a flying boat. When a flying boat is in the water, its fuselage serves as the boat's hull, whereas a float plane is essentially a regular airplane outfitted with floats. But it could potentially have traditional landing gear installed. The Schneider Cup, or Schneider Trophy races as they were commonly known, were very popular from 1913 to 1931. These float plane races were a matter of national pride, and a lot of money and effort was put into developing these planes. As a result, float planes were among the fastest planes in the world at the time. Second, because of their takeoff runs were not limited to the time-short runways, float planes could use very high wing loading and low-drag wings that were tuned for speed. Of course, larger runways would change this in favor of land-based aircraft later. Flying boats were very different from float planes. They were not particularly fast, but they played an important role in both commercial and military aviation throughout history. I do want to point out that many people believe the Supermarine race planes used an elliptical wing, but that is false. The wing was a straight leading edge and a straight trailing edge with a well-rounded tip. Since most population centers were on coasts or close to navigable rivers at the time, and airports, especially those with long runways, were not that common, the ability to land on water was a great advantage. In the United States, Pan American Airlines, also known as Pan Am, flew regularly scheduled flights across the Pacific in aircraft like this Martin flying boat. The ability to land on water was very useful from a military standpoint, and flying boats made a lot of sense for the same reasons that there were no airplanes or other models of transportation. Are you surprised after knowing all these amazing facts about the combat plane? Stay tuned until the end to see more. Make sure to like and subscribe to our channel to see more videos like this. The ability to land on water and meet up with ships or retrieve objects from the water, such as fallen airmen or survivors of shipwrecks. Ironically, World War II also hastened the downfall of the flying boat, which was deployed by all main forces participating in the combat. This was largely due to three factors: a 4-engine piston-powered airliner like a DC-6 or a similar aircraft could cross the ocean safely and in pressurized comfort after the war. Thanks to advances in engine reliability, airport development, and helicopter technology, airports were very common because so many had been built during World War II, and more were being built all the time. It should be clear that this aircraft won't break any speed records because, for one thing, its fuselage is shaped like a boat, which means that it is not aerodynamically optimized, and it also has a very high aspect ratio. Wings denote this. In comparison to the typical chord, the wingspan is extremely large. For the sake of brevity, we will concentrate primarily on the actions of the US Navy. However, the Catalina was already engaged in combat 7 months before the US entered World War II. It was a British Catalina flown by a US naval officer that spotted the Bismarck, prompting a swordfish torpedo bomber attack that ultimately resulted in the Bismarck's destruction. We'll just ignore that blatant neutrality violation while focusing on the actions of the Navy. There were only 8 P-51s left that could fly after the attack. 7 were in the air during the attack and avoided contact with the Japanese fighters. The 8th was attacked while at the mooring, but the Starfing Zeros missed and did not do any damage. So, ground crews were able to get it fueled, took off, and stayed safe, indicating that the Japanese attackers were successful. The Catalina was in the first combat action between the US and Japan in World War II, and effectively fired the first shot in the Philippines. Catalinas were primarily involved in defensive actions and evacuations, and they were obviously extremely vulnerable to attack by Japanese fighters. They suffered heavy losses, but on December 10, 1941, near the Philippines, a nose gun fired by a P-31 succeeded in sinking the sub. 6 planes were sent in to attack the Japanese ships at Jolo Island, southwest of the Philippines. At this point in the war, because the United States had not yet figured out how to use the Catalinas offensively. However, because they lacked experience attacking ships with Catalinas, they did so at a pretty high altitude, 10 to 12,000 feet, which is unusual for a Catalina. They did so because they were trying to hit a target. We are attempting to stay focused on combat, but we are aware that during this time, PBS crews carried out some incredible evacuation and rescue work, getting people out of the Philippines. Due to code breaking, the US was confident that the Japanese would attack at Midway, but they didn't know for sure until Catalina crews proved the information. There are many combat planes like Catalina, and the US Navy has some of the best combat planes for attacking and rescue missions. That is why the US Navy is unbeatable and called the Immortals. Here comes the end of our video. And make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel to see more fascinating content like this. More videos can also be found on our YouTube channel. See you later.